Good afternoon and welcome. Thank you for taking the time to listen to our Grade 7 News Network.
Today we will be welcoming two Grade 7 students, Jenna and Brianna, and we will be talking to them about their research on Oliman Pokiak Fenton. We're very excited to hear. Come on in.
Hi! Nice to meet you.
Nice to you. Welcome to the studio.
Thanks. We're super happy to share our research.
Yes. So we would like to ask you some questions about the research you've done on Oliman Pontiac Fenton. So tell us, who is this remarkable person?
Yeah, Oliman is an Inuvialuit residential school survivor born in 1936. Her and her daughter-in-law wrote a book on Oliman's residential school experience called Fatty Legs.
That's very interesting. I can't wait to learn more. So who are these Inuvialuit people? Tell us more.
The Inuvialuit people are a subgroup of the Inuit, and they live off the northern islands of the Northwest Territories.
Could you tell us more about the culture and where she is from?
Yeah, so she was from Banks Island, which is the 5th largest island in the Northwest Territories. This group are a group of nomads, and they depend heavily on the land and the seasons. So in the winter, they're in like a little bit of bigger clumps of people, and they fish and eat seals and whales and all that kind of stuff and do some trading. And then in the summer, they do some more inland trapping, and because the weather's a little bit nicer and they feel a little bit more safe, they kind of like break up a little bit more on their own. There's also tons of copper deposits on the island. So the Europeans nicknamed them the Copper Inuits, which they probably didn't really like.
Right. Also, prior to European contact with the Inuvialuit people, they lived there for 3,000 years, which is a really long time. And they put a huge emphasis on family. And July was a special month for them because it was festival time, and they would compete in physical games, sort of like the Olympics that we have today.
Wow. So I heard you speak about the Inuvialuit people and the Europeans. How did the Inuvialuit way of life change after European contact?
The contact with the Europeans and the Inuvialuit people was primarily for trading purposes until World War II in 1939. So then they were legally given these disc numbers, which meant that they were identified by a number instead of by their name, because they had a really special way of like naming the people. So you were named for what you were in your past life and what you were going to become and who you were. So you weren't necessarily named as soon as you were born. And naming wasn't gender specific. So Oliman could have been a female and a male name, for example, right? And so they thought this was really confusing, so they stole their identities by giving them this number. So traditionally, yeah, that's how they named the people.
So what was their experience with the residential schools?
So with the residential school experience was different for every child, but the Banks Island was so far to the north that it took a little bit longer for it to become obligatory for the children to attend residential schools. So traditionally, Inuvialuit people practiced shamanism, so they were very connected with their ancestors and with spiritual forces. But in residential schools, there was a big emphasis on Christianity. And so they were forced to practice a different religion. Also, the children were humiliated in a few different ways. The first one was that they cut their hair. So as you can see on the cover of the book, their hair is really short. The Inuvialuit people would only cut their hair when a person in their immediate family passed away. So it was humiliating in front of the other kids. Also, they didn't understand English right from the get-go, but a lot of the nuns expected them to, so they were humiliated when they couldn't understand what the nuns were asking them to do.
So how has life changed for the Inuvialuit people since the closing of residential schools?
Well, today there are about 3,000 Inuvialuit people still, and they have regained some of their culture and their language. One of the ways is that actually in 1970, the Canadian government granted them to have their names back, and they didn't have to carry around their little disc with their identity on it anymore. So there was that going for them, but some of them still, because they were more Canadian names, some of them still prefer their traditional names. In July, they still celebrate with their athletic games that they originally had, which is really nice culture that they had. But actually, there are no more humans living on Banks Island anymore. Just some trappers, but I think the weather and the climate is just too rough up there. Yeah.
Do you think it's possible for a similar situation to take place in Canada today?
Definitely. I think we need to be careful about what we do. We need to be careful and understand other cultures so that it doesn't happen again. But it could.
Yeah, and just like really making people educationally aware of what happened in the past so that we don't make the same mistakes. Especially with all these other cultures coming in, we want to make sure that we appreciate and respect them and help them to practice and continue with their culture.
You know, it does sound like education, like such as the residential schools, was once the thing that tore apart the Indigenous people. But it sounds like education could be the thing that brings us back together. So thank you so much for joining us today and educating us all about the Inuvialuit people.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you for having us.